We got to make sure, doctor, about the second dose, got to monitor that, make sure people complete the regimen. And I would imagine we need to know, as you point out in your op-ed, whether people are contagious or not, whether we can count on the vaccine to have a beneficial effect on the spread in addition to protecting from the worst symptoms. Does it make someone less contagious? Do you know?
Right, and we've talked about this on the show. You've asked me about this before. We don't know the answer to that question. We don't know whether or not the vaccine just prevents signs and symptoms of COVID, which is what the trial demonstrated. People didn't get symptomatic COVID disease. Or is it also preventing some infections and making people less likely to spread the infection? Now, we assume that it's also probably preventing some infections. And we also assume from some of the primate studies that we did with vaccines, from these mRNA vaccines and vaccines more broadly, that it gives you what we call a non-sterilizing mucosal immunity, which basically means you have immunity at the site of the membranes where you'd be likely to shed the virus, like in your lungs or in your nose. And so you're less likely to shed the virus after vaccination. But these things need to be demonstrated. And the way we're going to prove this, by and large, is with post-market data by following people who've been vaccinated and seeing if they're less likely to spread the infection or get infected in the first place. There is going to be some data coming out of the clinical trials to answer this question. The manufacturers are looking at whether or not people who get vaccinated develop antibodies to other parts of the virus besides the part of the virus that the vaccine is designed to stimulate antibodies against. So the vaccine is designed to stimulate antibodies against the spike protein. But if you look at people's blood who got vaccinated and you see antibodies against other parts of the virus, like the nucleocapsid protein, that's an indication that they got infected and they just didn't get symptomatic. So there are ways to tell from the clinical trial data, but by and large, it's going to be the post-market data that we monitor to try to answer these questions definitively.
You just indirectly got at a point that I actually wanted to drill down upon, and that is the mechanism of the virus, which actually the pathology of the virus, or the reason that you get sick. We've seen the side effects seem to be manageable with the vaccines, but I was wondering myself whether a immune reaction to the spike protein in and of itself could make someone sick. And what usually causes, what part of the virus, is it the capsid, which you just talked about, that causes a person to become really sick and die? Hopefully it's not an exposure to the spike protein, it's an exposure to the virus as a whole.
Right. Well, we don't know. I mean, it looks like it's an overwhelming immune response to just having so much virus on board that makes a lot of people sick and generates what we call that cytokine storm. But, there are questions about whether exposure to the spike protein alone as a viral epitope, as a part of the virus, can itself trigger some of these post-viral sequelae that we've seen, these autoimmune types of reactions. We don't know the answer to that question. Now, that said, the data from the clinical trials, and you've had a lot of patients in these clinical trials, the top-line data at least, and none of us have seen the detailed data, looks fairly clean. So that's a good indication that the vaccines have a reasonable safety profile. But a lot of these side effects, these rare side effects, are longer term. And so we're going to need to follow the people in the clinical trials. And that's also why we need good post-market data collection. If you look at the side effects that FDA is looking for, so FDA can monitor for about 20 side effects in the post-market. That's generally rule of thumb. If you look at the compilation of side effects that they're monitoring for, included in the kinds of things that they're going to be looking for, are some of the kinds of sequelae that we see from natural infections. So that's at least an indication that the regulators think that there's the potential that some of these side effects we're seeing from people who get sick from COVID might be also triggered by exposure to that spike protein. So they're going to be looking for it. Now, we don't think that's the case. There's no real evidence to suggest that, but they're going to be looking for that to get at the very point that you raised.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.